part of the world you're joining in, but it's such a pleasure to have you here with us. And, before we start, it'll be great if we just see a little video to set the, context, and then we'll go ahead with the interview today. Yeah.
As the world is grappling with a lot of challenges like climate change, healthcare, and the recent coronavirus outbreak that is happening, the world is increasingly turning to technology as a means for discovering new solutions that is plaguing the world at this point.
Okay, thank you everybody for joining up. Some of you may have joined us during the video session, but thanks so much again. And you've seen Ram in the pictures, you've seen him in the video, and it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today, Ram. Good evening.
Good evening, Mudit, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me here.
Yes, absolutely. Such a pleasure to have Ram there. And the best way is, rather than me taking out a long speech about, Ram, I'm just going to request him to just talk a bit about himself and his journey, and so we can get to know him a little better.
Okay. Well, I won't bore everybody, but I have about 35 years of work experience. I did my undergrad, up to my undergrad in India, of course, but then I went right after my undergrad for my master's to the US. So professionally, I never worked in India till I actually moved back to India 18 years ago. And my career really has two parts to it. There's one part which was I'm a mechanical engineer by training, and I have a master's in mechanical, which actually took me to the Detroit area in the US. I did my master's at University of Michigan, which is right in the the suburbs of Detroit. And so I landed up working in the auto industry for about 12 years. At which point I got my MBA and then shifted at the University of Michigan as well. And then I shifted to the tech sector. So my last 18 years or so has really been in that space. I started with Microsoft in the US, moved back to India 18 years ago, and since then, I've been part of four companies. I moved back to Microsoft. I was with Yahoo, and then with eBay, and now with VMware. So it's kind of two parts to my career, but it's been a lot of learnings and shifting and changes that have happened in those 35 years, which I think I'm richer for at this point in time. I'm happy to share some of my experience with all of you.
Yes, fantastic. And they're all sort of eagerly looking forward to, hearing from you. But tell us a bit about your US journey first, right? I mean, doing mechanical engineering and then getting into the auto industry, right? And what prompted you to move out? I mean, did you see trends or, it was after your MBA? What prompted you to move into technology?
No, fair enough. I think, while I'm a mechanical engineer by background, I've been working with computers and computer-aided design and manufacturing and engineering, etc., for ever since my master's work. So I've always been in the software space. I was just writing a very different kind of software, and I actually turned entrepreneur fairly early in my career. I've had the good fortune or experience of actually being an entrepreneur, in the US. But that was one of the prompts for me to go back to do my MBA, because I realized that, while trying to be an entrepreneur at an age where today, there's a lot more information available. There's a lot of other sources from which you can learn. There's a lot of other experiences you can draw upon. The internet didn't exist. So, I date myself by saying this, but the internet was something that we used at university to send out emails to each other. So the mid 90s is when internet as we know it today slowly started emerging, right? So before that, there was no real avenues to learn, or unless you were in an environment like maybe if I were in the valley, it might have been a little different. But being in Detroit, it wasn't really a great place to learn about a lot of other skills that you may want to pick up. It was a great place to work if you're an engineer, but not otherwise. So that was what prompted me to go back to school. So, the way I look at it is there are two ways of learning. You either learn from experience of yourself and those around you, or you have to go back and get something a little more formal, which is what I decided to do. So I got my MBA along the way, and post MBA, it was a chance to go do something different. And we as a family said, look, when there is an opportunity like that, why not look broader? And my intent really was to go to Microsoft, and I was recruited out of the business school by Microsoft. And my intention at that time was, let me go try Microsoft for a while, but then still come back to becoming an entrepreneur at some point. I mean, that's really where my head was. But Microsoft's a great company, and I had a fantastic experience working there for 8 years in many different roles. I mean, in 8 years, I probably got an experience which spanned, otherwise would have been 15, 20 years, because I got a chance to be part of two internal startups at Microsoft. I moved back to India with Microsoft, like I said, but into a very different role. I came back to being the chief of staff to the chairman of India, chairman of Microsoft India. And some of you may know Ravi Venkatesan by reputation or by as in person. So I was his chief of staff for 3 years at a time when Microsoft was going through an immense amount of change in India. So it gave me a chance to look at the India market from a very different vantage point and a lens that I could not have done otherwise. It gave me a chance to work at a very strategic level at the ground, looking at various aspects of the Indian market. So that 3 years that I spent as his chief of staff, Ravi as a person was a fantastic person to learn from. He has a lot of other positive skills that anybody would love to learn from at close quarters. But more than that, it was also a set of experiences that I gained by doing that, which gave me a very different vantage point. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I can continue on with some of my other experiences.
Yes. Some very interesting insights coming out of there. I mean, you wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then you didn't really go back, right? So what's that going on within your mind? How do you
Yeah. As things would have it. The thing is, I think entrepreneurship is a mindset. It's not about the job that you do. Yes, of course, there are two ways of doing it. You could do it within a large company, which is now called entrepreneurship, which is what I was lucky enough to do at Microsoft and beyond that. Or you get involved in things which is a very, gives you an aspect of entrepreneurship, but in a very different way, right? The way I look at myself personally is I'm either a V1 person, so I like building things from scratch, or I've also had experiences where I've had to turn around things, and which also teaches you a lot in terms of how you think about markets, how you think about various other things. while I never went back to starting another company, at least not yet. Perhaps there's one more waiting somewhere that's not yet got there. But my last 17, 18 years has given me a wide range of experiences. I also, as you know, I spend a lot of time in the ecosystem, which allows me to vicariously work with startup founders on various problems that they are solving. So at this stage of my career, I actually find more value in looking at a broader set of issues and perhaps helping people, with their specific problems areas rather than me turning an entrepreneur. So I don't know. So I haven't got around to it, but I get my satisfaction doing other things.
Absolutely. No, it was so truly said. And, India is such a amazing place to be. And in your role at NASSCOM, I think you get all the experience vicariously. And I'm sure they benefit tremendously from your experience. But just a question that comes up, during our time, we did our MBAs and we got in, to work whichever way. But today the world has changed. One is I hear, the cost of an MBA overseas, and, there's so much debt that's there. Secondly, there are a lot of youngsters creating unicorns without, ever having gone to an MBA school, right? Mm-hmm. So what's your advice for the world today, for people who are leaders, who are like 30, 35 plus, they've done 10, 15 years, should they go back and, reskill themselves, or what's your take?
So I think we have to separate two things here. There's one which is reskilling and continuous learning. And I think that's a non-negotiable. How you do it is something that's what you're asking. Do you do it more formally or do you do it more informally by getting involved in more things, doing a lot of that stuff? So just from you mentioned the kind of the age band or the experience band that people are kind of struggling with this thing. Frankly, I was in the same age band. I was in my 30s. I had about 9 years of work experience when I went back from my MBA. And I didn't do it full time. So I didn't like quit my job. And then, I was running a company. I was earning, if I didn't work, there was no income, right? So that wasn't an option. So I actually went back for a part-time MBA. So I did that in the evening program, at the university, which allowed me to work during the day and do MBA at night. Of course, it's a lot of commitment. And it's not just a commitment of my time, but there is a lot of support needed from family and everybody else, because it's not a simple thing to do. As if those who have done it, it's not a simple exercise of just say, okay, I'm going to go to class. There's a lot of work involved and there's a lot of unknowns at the end of it. Now, the point you're making about young folks who are coming out of college or, who are starting companies, more power to them. I think there's some fantastic founders. I think they've done a great job. I mean, I think the Indian ecosystem has about 28,000 tech startups, of various vintages, founders of various vintages. But I think what I would say is there are, again, skilling and relearning is definitely a plus, right? It has to be done, and that's not negotiable. Now, in terms of, how you can learn, I think there are two ways. I mean, like I said, today the amount of opportunity and the avenues to learn is just phenomenal, right? I mean, you could go everything from MOOC classes that is available off the internet to getting involved in the ecosystem that lets you learn from the experiences of others, to joining some of these companies and learning on the job, right? I mean, there's so many different aspects and avenues that are available for people. The thing is, should you do a more formal education like going and getting an MBA or not? I think it all depends on what you want. If you believe that there are some fundamental areas, and I mean, I'll tell you why I did my MBA, right? I think there were a few areas which I found my personal gap around. As an engineer, you don't know much about how marketing works or how finance works. So some of those things. Now, yes, today there's a lot more avenue. You can go sign up for a class online and go learn it. In those days, there wasn't. But I believe that there is some. If you go to a good business school, and you don't have to go abroad, right? There are enough avenues here as well. In India. The opportunity to do that is one, the little more formal learning that comes with it, right? I mean, there are some things that benefits from formal learning than just some informal thing that you take classes online and kind of pick things up. To me, the other big thing that happened was the conversations that happen within your class teams. I think the value, if you go, one of the advantages of going to a good business school, wherever it is the fact that there is a selection process, the people coming in are motivated to learn. And if there is a good faculty that can actually tie it all together, there's actually benefit in doing a full-time MBA, right? So, I hear a lot of refrain about, oh, MBA, people who finish MBAs don't know how to think, and here come the MBAs. I mean, there's a lot of things out there. But I think there is something to be said for the formal education that comes with it. Okay. I mean, from a good business school. Of course, you can't walk out of that business school saying, I have all the answers. I mean, that's what gets you into trouble, right? You have to have the humility to say, okay, I have the building blocks of what needs to be done for a business. But there's still a lot of learning to be done once you get back into the real world. And I think if you come in with an open mind, if you come in with the ability to say, hey, I don't really know how to use the MBA that I got, but that's what I want to learn, I think there'll be a lot more opportunities for somebody to do this. So I don't know if I answered your question straight,
Yes,
but
yes.
I guess it comes down to what the individual wants out of what they want.
Absolutely. The other thing is, Ram, is that today, let's say there are people, because the ecosystem has changed and now there's so many unicorns coming out of India. I'm sure all these executives here watching, there might be an itch somewhere, right? Let me get out and do something. Now, we know the success rates of most startups, right? So one is, what is your advice? When to take that decision, whether you should do something or not, right? That's one part of the question. And the other part is, how does a corporate view somebody who's gone out, done something, and then it perhaps has not succeeded and he wants to come back?
Yeah.
So we'll just take it separately. So you can start with the first one.
So I think the wrong reason to do a startup, I think there are a few, right? You shouldn't do it because you can't think of anything else to do. That's that's probably not a great formula for success. Second, I don't think you do this to get rich. I mean, while we talk about unicorns and some of these founders have become fabulously wealthy, I don't think most people don't start out saying, look, I'm going to make a ton of money, so I'm going to go do a startup. So the real reason that people do this is because they really, truly, passionately feel that they can make a difference to a problem that they have identified, right? Now, there is still a lot of due diligence involved in terms of validating it, making sure that there's a real problem here, talking to customers or potential customers, seeing if, even if you solve that problem, is somebody going to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of due diligence involved before you actually step in and say, look, I'm going to go now do this full time, right? Where I think the question to ask at that point is, am I better served in getting on this treadmill, which is an entrepreneurship treadmill, which it is a treadmill, and there's an opportunity cost because you're giving up a full-time job in probably a little more safer environment. You don't know whether you're cut out to be an entrepreneur because it requires a certain amount of mentality of resilience and staying power, and here's the thing, right? If you're successful as an entrepreneur, it's a long-term gig. It's not something that you do for a few years and flip it and exit. Sure. I mean, you may get lucky and and maybe the timing is right and you can exit. But success rate is 1%. I mean, that's the reality, right? So as an individual, you have to really evaluate things on a multiple levels and do that. And some of it comes down to personal situations, their own, whatever their particular situation is in terms of doing this. And frankly, it's worth, there are some, some organizations that actually help people kind of make up their mind whether they want to be an entrepreneur. I mean, they have these 3-month, 6-month kind of courses that people can take that allows them to, even figure out if entrepreneurship is the right model for them. And it's worth doing that, especially if you're at a certain stage of your career where it's a real opportunity cost. I mean, you can either stay with a larger organization and try to grow with it, right? Or within larger companies, or you go do this, right? An entrepreneurial gig. I don't think age is a bar. I mean, sometimes I get this question saying, am I too old for this? I don't believe so, right? I mean, there have been examples of people who have started, in fact, I think I've seen that the average success rate increases with age, right? So people in their 40s and 50s have been more successful as entrepreneurs than people in their 20s. So there is this notion of you have to demystify saying that, age is not a barrier if you're really passionate about going and doing this. But you have to be ready for it, right? You have to be mentally ready for it because it's not a halfway step. It's a real step. So that's one side to it. Whether should you be an entrepreneur or not, is that the right thing for you individually, collectively, whatever. The other part is you start something, it goes on for a while, and it doesn't work out, or you say, okay, enough is enough. I've burnt enough money. let me come back to a real job, right? Coming back to whatever it is. I think the question there is, how do you present yourself to that organization or the organization that's looking for you? Maybe 10 years ago, there was a little bit of a barrier, right? I mean, I would say that there was a lot more hindrance if you did an entrepreneurial gig and you wanted to come back into a larger organization. But I think today that is not as big a challenge. Most people understand that if you've either started a company or you worked for a startup that didn't work out, there are skills that people have picked up. The question is, how do you present those skills? What have you learned in those intervening years? How can you help the organization that you're looking to join? What is the value statement that you can bring to the table that says, hey, I did this. Here are 3 things I learned from what I did, and it didn't work out, but here are some big learnings that I have, and here's how I can help your organization with those learnings that I have and the experience I have. I think that's really what it comes down to, right? In saying what it is. And organizations, I think, are more and more valuing that. Yeah, I think they're looking beyond the resume in terms of whether success, failure, or whatever it is, and moving forward. Let me talk about the flip side, right? I also see a lot of people who have worked for the same company for a very long time. That also comes up in hiring decisions. Did this person work a little too long for one organization, whatever it is? In that also, I think it's important, and this is maybe we can talk a little more when we get into a career dialogue, but in terms of how do you manage your career, even if you have stayed in the same company for a long time, right? How do you show pathways of experiences that can be looked upon favorably? So we can talk about
I think that's a great time to begin the career dialogue because they're all waiting for it. So, how would you, tell mid-career managers, hoping to become CXOs at that level, how should they be managing their careers? What should they be doing?
I think there's, first of all, I don't know there's any one magic formula. I think all of us, if you talk to 10 people, you'll get 10 answers as to how careers happen. First of all, I think it's not something, yes, I think it's good to be aspirational. It's good to have an ambition, but it really starts with a set of building blocks. And how are you setting yourself up for progression in your career? Will you hit the peak? At what point you hit the peak? Do you get to the top of the thing of the end? It all depends on, some of it is luck. People underplay serendipity a lot. I'm a believer that sometimes luck has a role to play in some of these things, right? You may be in the right place, right time, right support system that actually catapults you to the next level. It's happened to me as well, right? I mean, I told you about my, my experience of, by the time I moved to India, I had already been working for about 17 years, right? And so, but the 3 years that I worked with Ravi and Microsoft India were transformational for somebody with 17 years of work experience. If I look back, that is one of those avenues, where I kind of shift, or you say orbit shifting. It shifted me from one orbit to the next, from a mentality perspective, from a preparatory perspective, and various other things, right? So I think there's those opportunities. That's luck. I mean, I didn't come in thinking that will happen, but it did happen. So I think the way I would think about this for people is to say, look, there are a few things that you have to be ready to do, right? You have to be ready to open yourself up for new experiences, and take some risks, right? If you're a mid-career and if you're doing the more and more of the same, it's probably not going to help very much. If you really are looking to shift orbit, you're trying to catapult yourself to the next level, you have to do a set of things. One, like I said, take risks, open yourself up, look for those opportunities. It may not be that you have to shift out of your job, but there may be side things that you can pick up, you volunteer for within the organization that actually helps. In every organization, there's probably a set of strategic initiatives that are being thought through by the senior management. If you can be part of some of those, it gives you 2 things. One, it gives you enough visibility beyond your network, right? Beyond your immediate network. The second thing it does is it opens you up for a set of dialogues and a set of experiences, which you will not likely get in your day job, right? So I think that's one. So be open for that. Second, if an opportunity presents itself, and if it's moderately okay, it's worth going for it, go for it, okay? Even if it is away from your core experience. And I think people tend to play it very safe, particularly in the mid stages of their career, because there is fear, right? You've done the same thing for a while. You've kind of grown. You've been moderately successful doing what you do. Is it really the right time for me to go try something completely different? And, you know, some people shift jobs, right? I mean, that's the time people also start thinking about entrepreneurship and things like that. But if you're going to do it outside the company, why not try it inside the company where you already have some credibility? It is worth doing that. So even if it's a different role, figure out a way if it makes sense for you to take it up. And even if you're not successful, widely successful, the experience will make you richer. And I think it's worth thinking about that. Third is stay curious and continue to learn. And I think it's very important to do that. Is don't stop learning. I mean, continue. And learning is not just reading books or taking classes. It's also about getting involved in dialogues, having a point of view. If you're in the tech business, the world is changing every day. So do you have a strong enough point of view on emerging technologies? Today, generative AI, you have to be hiding under a rock not to be hearing about this. Do you have a perspective? Have you building a perspective? Are you getting involved in dialogues in the ecosystem that are looking at that topic? What can you bring back to the organization that you can do, right? So those kinds of things, it's very important to continue to learn. So anyway, I think, last but not least, have some kind of a side hustle going. It doesn't need to be monetary, right? I mean, we can talk about moonlighting, but I have my perspectives on that. But I think it's beyond that, right? It's not just about, money making. It's about, are you opening yourself up again to experiences that can actually be positive to you in your career and things like that. So.
Great. So I think there's some great takeaways there about being open, taking risk, being curious, and of course, having a point of view, right? Which is, and that comes to a very interesting thing, because a lot of, people in my program where I teach people, moving ahead from being a leader to a CXO, a lot of them ask me, sometimes there's so many at that mid-level, and then it's a triangle, right? And it gets more and more inclined, and fewer people get up. Yep. So what are the few things that you would advise mid-career people to move up the ladder?
Yeah. See, I think you have to remember that once you've reached a certain stage in the organization, in your career or level or whatever, right? Doing your day job is considered table stakes. If you're doing it well, people are not going to go out of their way to say, "Oh, you're doing a fantastic job that I expect you to do anyway." So I think, that's one thing that I keep telling people in the mid stages of their career. The fact that, people come in and say, "Oh, I did this fantastic work, right? I delivered this." I said, "That's your job. So tell me more, right? Tell me what else have you been doing?" And I think that's where the points that I made about taking on horizontal projects, right? Standing out, driving new thinking in the organization. Because like I said, there's always going to be, especially if it doesn't matter if you're in the tech space or not, to be honest. Because now every company is a tech company. Digitization is pervasive, right? And so even if you're not a technologist, you're not an engineer, you're not a software engineer, you need to have a perspective on how digitization is going to have a effect on your organization. It could be in manufacturing, it could be in healthcare, it could be in retail, it could be in anything. So that's things like that, right? Bringing back a perspective. That's what I mean by having a point of view. So things like that, driving new thinking. How can you get involved in some of those kind of projects? And then you have to be seen as a credible leader in the organization. Are you putting your hand up? Are you standing out? Are you bringing people together? Right. One of the things that is underappreciated and which I appreciate in people is the fact that how much are you doing in making others around you better? It's not just about yourself, right? A senior leader is not judged based on just their, what they get done. They are judged based on how well are you able to get people together towards a purpose and an objective and bringing them together to achieve it. So it is about getting people around a purpose, building a purpose, getting them excited about it, and then bringing them together as a team, irrespective of whether they report to you or they are, a virtual team that you bring together, managing by influence. Some of these traits are very, very, are absolutely needed as you start to grow in your career. In fact, I tell people that the higher you are in the organization, the less people will listen to you if you don't do these kinds of things. So you can't, top-down management is dead, right? managing my influence and managing, learning to manage people by that is very critical. And I think those are the kinds of traits that are very important for people if they want to really grow in their careers.
Great. So I think, two key points that I take away from what you're saying is, one is day job is not enough. You've got to do something to stand out, right? And the other part I really heard was coming through very clearly is that you need to be able to get people around, right? And influence them to take on, bigger responsibilities or work towards something. And the third thing I heard was, how do you, improve people around you? I think those are 3 points which will stand in good stead for everybody here.
Yeah.
Which brings us to another allied point, right? So in terms of what is your views on, executive presence, right? What would you say to, mid-career managers? How do they sort of establish that, and what do they need to do?
Yeah, the way I think about this is, I think exec presence and personal branding are kind of two sides of the same coin. Because exec presence is not just about how you appear to the higher levels of the organization. It's about how you carry yourself on a day-to-day basis. And I think that translates into how you come across, right? So let me touch upon that a little bit. And I call it the ABCs of personal branding, right? Attitude, behavior, and credibility. I think these are 3 components that are very, very important on building a personal brand. And hence, as you step forward into various scenarios, how do you come across? Like I said, managing top down is is kind of a dead concept. To be seen as a credible leader in the organization means that it's not just about exec presence as in you presenting to the board of directors or the CEO of the company. It's also about how you appear to your peer group. How do you appear to people, lower down in the organization from where you are? And how do you appear not just internally to the company, but also externally? Because every company operates in a network of ecosystem. And you have to be able to manage all of these pieces to be effective. So let me kind of double click on it a little. When I talk about ABC, attitude is the first one, right? Be positive and optimistic. I think nobody wants to be around somebody who's a thrill. None of us want to be around such people, right? You may sound, it's irrespective of what the situation is. You don't want to be coming across as a person who's constantly complaining, who's constantly seeing the glass half empty rather than full. Sure, everybody has frustrations, right? I mean, every one of us has our own nits and picks and all that kind of stuff. But I think it all comes down to how do you convert? What do you do with it? You can do a few things. You can either try to change the situation around you, from where you are, or change yourself, change your situation completely, right? I mean, all of us have choices, and what choice do you want to pick up? And in doing that, keep it at a positive level and optimistic level. Even if you're leaving the company, don't leave it with bridges burned, because this, the organizer, we work in a very small world, irrespective of who you are, whether it's you and I are neighbors, right? You may suddenly run into this somebody, in a situation which is not necessarily only professional. So I think, you have to be very mindful about how you come across and what attitude you carry. Because, personally, I would hire somebody for attitude over aptitude. Because if somebody shows great attitude to learn, to be positive, to optimistic, I would rather take that person than somebody who comes in with all the skills that are perfect but has a bad attitude, right? So I think attitude, that's why attitude becomes the number one. Second is behavioral, right? Are you humble? Are you authentic? Are you grateful? Are you composed in tough situations? How do you come across? Because I think those are important. If you want to build, credibility with people around you, you need to be that, right? Everything can't be about yourself. That's why I said, one metric is how much are you doing to help other people improve around you? How much are you helping them, get better? Even if the spotlight goes on them and not you. I'll tell you, 99% of the time, there's positive, feedback that comes back to the person who's doing that, even if they are not the front and center and the spotlight and everybody's only looking at them. It doesn't matter. So behavioral traits matter a lot when you think about personal branding and exec presence, because I think that builds authenticity. And authenticity is very important, because you need to be who you are, right? And people need to be able to see that, and it's transparent. The third is credibility. Are you driven by a set of values? Are you authentic? Again, authenticity coming back from a credibility perspective, building credibility. And are you trustworthy? Do you say what you will do, and do you follow up and do it, right? Are you dependable? and trustworthy. So I think these three things, attitude, behavior, and credibility, forms the underpinnings of this. Everything else gets built around, right? Your ability to communicate, your ability to kind of bring different perspectives, points of view, like I mentioned, bringing all of that together. And I think that makes, are you a great conversationalist? Can you tell a story? There's a lot more discussion nowadays about storytelling. And, and can you really tell a story? Can you weave things, disparate points and kind of create a cogent story out of it and be able to communicate?
Fantastic. I think the ABC of, it's been fantastic. I think I really love that, and if I could just summarize it, right? Like attitude and attitude over aptitude. I think that's the great takeaway, right? And in terms of behavior, just being positive and, giving that vibe around, getting people around, I think because people see what you're doing, right, at work. So that's fantastic. And see credibility. I think so often, this is the part that I think a lot of people, somehow don't seem to get. Because it's not about putting your hand up for a project, but how dependable are you? People will give you extra work when they know. In fact, the hardest working or the best guys get more work. Which,
no, it's okay to say no. That doesn't mean that you take on everything that comes your way. I mean, that's also not a formula for success, right? I mean, you need to have your own prioritization criteria on what you will do and not do, and be realistic, right? What you can do, and if you're overwhelmed, you're overwhelmed. Part of this is also asking for help, or it's okay to say no, but say no in a way in which others understand why you're saying. It's not just you're seen as this person who's always saying no to everything, right? You're not willing to step up on it. It's okay to do that, right? Or ask for clarity. If it's somebody who's giving you a new project from above you, ask for clarity. Hey, I have these 5 things that I'm doing. Is there any one that I can drop off? Like, I'm happy to take it, but hey, what drops off, right? So I think that's what I'm saying. You need to get into that mode of doing that. And here's where some cultural aspects come in, right? In India, we feel a little reticent to say no to. Whereas if you're in, let's say in the US, people are really more upfront when they say, look, I can't do this, right? I have too much on my plate. I'm not going to take it up. I don't have the bandwidth to do it. And here's why. Culturally, we are not wired for that. But it's a good trait to pick up, to say no in certain situations. The Indian headshake doesn't work sometimes.
Yeah.
where you're not exactly sure whether somebody said yes or no, or maybe, and things don't get done, right? I mean, somebody else is thinking you're going to do it and it doesn't get done, and that does not end well.
Great. I think that you make a great point there. And I think one thing I'm going to take away from there is, one point that you just set up the next question is, most of the people on the call and here, they're working in international companies, right? So you do come from a certain cultural background, right? What do Indians need to do to stand out in global companies, right? Because their bosses could be overseas, and a majority, most of my students, what do they need to do to survive and do well in the global organization?
See, I think a certain amount of empathy is required. It's not about that, some people are out to get you, or they don't understand what I say, or or whatever. That impedance mismatch, if you may, it exists everywhere. It's not just it's not in India or somebody in non-India, whatever. It's really about understanding each other. Have you built a relationship? I think it starts with that. Once you build relationships, you get to know each other. And that's where the empathy aspects comes in, right? You understand where somebody else is coming from, and you hopefully the other person is starting to pick up where you're coming from. Once relationships get built, then it's easier to say no to something, right? Or say yes to something, or jointly agree that, hey, this is the priority that we want to work on. But I think where I see sometimes things break down is lack of communication. Like I said, somebody is not sure whether you said yes or no, and they're walking away. Clarity is important. Be sure that to play it back, to say, hey, here's what I think we agreed on. I hope you're on the same page. And it doesn't matter if it's your boss or your boss's boss, or up the chain or down the chain. Clarity of communication and agreement on what is the outcomes that we are trying to jointly achieve, for what outcome or what purpose. I think these 3 things are pretty probably important, right? If you leave it up, you can't leave it ambiguous, irrespective of who you are. It doesn't matter if you're in India or wherever, right? you can't leave ambiguity on the table, especially if you're remote from each other. So I think that is very important to start building a relationship, clarity of purpose, clarity of outcome, and clarity of agreement on how that outcomes will be achieved together. Who's doing what and in what time frame, right? I think so. These are simple framework that actually helps going in a long way in building that trust and credibility with each other.
Oh, fantastic. I think that's a great point, because we, in the program that I sort of take with a lot of the students here in the CXO 90-day challenge, there's actually executive toolkits that we, study. And what is it? And one of the things, like you said, right, when you end a conversation, who's doing what, right? Because if that's not clear, then there is ambiguity, and then it spirals into things which, occasionally end up not being quite right. So great point there. I think there were four takeaways there, and which we'll pick up. So the next thing is, most of some of us have been luckier than others to have reached where we are, right? But life hasn't always been perfect. So would you like to just share with the audience, times when you've had it perhaps a little ambiguous, a little tough, you haven't got made done it perfectly, and how you sort of recovered, and how important resilience is. Two parts to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, no career starts in the bottom left and ends at the top right, in a straight line. It never works.
Absolutely.
I think I describe it. In fact, I have a presentation where the first thing I put up is a roller coaster, because that typically is how your not just your career, I mean, your life, right? I mean, there's a lot of turmoil that comes in, and, there's peace times, there's war times, there's various other things happen. So if I look back on my 35 years, there's been many occasions. Some of it have been, harder than others to overcome. But resilience gets built over time, and I'll get into the specifics of resilience in a second. At a personal level, most recently, probably, recently in the sense just before my VMware experience, I was leading eBay in India. I helped to set up the development center here in Bangalore, and then the company made a decision that they exited the country. They sold the business to Flipkart. They decided to shut down the development center. So it's probably one of the more recent examples of where I had to build something up and then shut it down, right? Mm-hmm. And that is not an easy exercise. I mean, if that's when you start realizing how lonely leadership can be. That time. But while it was tough to go through, there were also an opportunity to learn from it, right? And there were some lessons that came through in that. Some of it initially you feel that, hey, could you have done something differently? You start self-judging yourself a little bit, which is fine. But at the same time, I think it's important to realize what were some of the decisions that drove the result of what happened. Right? Could you have done something different? Perhaps. But a lot of it was also business related, which you have no control over, that a company makes a decision. So sometimes you have to rationalize, where you could have made a difference and where things were out of your control, right? So I think part of, these kinds of scenarios is people can get very down, right? I mean, it is tough. But at the same time, you have to at some point kind of sit back and say, okay, what really happened here? Analyze the situation a little deeper and say, okay, could I have done something different, etc. So maybe, and take away some lessons from it. Now, talking about resilience in a professional life, I think it's important, just to define resilience, right? It's really, a process or an outcome of successfully adapting to a difficult situation, changing experiences, through, then there's probably a mental component to it because it's very stressful. It's, you have to learn to deal. I think it's very emotional. Like I told you, I mean, if you build up something from scratch and then you have to shut it down, it's an emotional change, right? It was very, I literally I turned off the lights, on the way out, right? And it is, when you walk in there, a week ago, it was a very vibrant office. People were in the office, working, a lot of conversations, laughter, etc., going on. And then a few weeks later, you walk and it's a dead shell, right? And you are there to just close things out. And it is emotional when you do that. And then there is, how do you adjust to behavioral flexibility and adjust to internal and external demands, etc. So the way I think about this is in three phases, right? There's a fragile phase, which is, very easily damaged by shocks. You cannot, you absolutely cannot tolerate any shocks in the system, right? Any adverse reaction that may happen, you falters easily. So how fragile are you at a personal level, or your organization if you're leading an organization? How fragile are you? Second is, you know, how do you, is there a level of robustness that you can build, so that it survives a few more shocks, or you personally can survive a few more shocks and you can bounce back? Can you tolerate adversity? Now, the nirvana state is completely anti-fragile, right? You welcome the shocks. I mean, you go seeking out experiences. And from a distance for sure, I kind of, it's very inspiring to see people who climb mountains, right? I mean, they are an example of anti-fragility, because yes, it's extremely dangerous. They're going and doing it. So, but they've built some kind of a resilience in themselves to withstand some of the hardships and the, adverse environments that they would operate in. So the question is, how are you building that anti-fragility that lets you survive shocks? Are you preparing for it? Are you going through with, any kind of resiliency building exercises that will help you get there? And, I think there are about 5 things in resilience building that exist, right? One is, first, start with self-awareness. How fragile are you? Are you going to break easily if something comes along, right? Are you financially stable, or have you set aside money for those adverse situations? Whatever it is, I think you have to evaluate yourself from that lens to say self-awareness. Second is mindfulness. Are you practicing mindfulness? And I know, Mudit, you're a mindfulness coach as well. So I'm speaking to the choir here when I talk about the fact that, are you practicing some kind of mindfulness and deliberation on what you do? And, you're probably better positioned to speak about it more deeply than I am. Right? Third is self-care. Are you taking time out for yourself? Are you doing things for yourself? Like I said, are you picking up a hobby? If you're into sports, are you doing something outside of your day job that keeps you more grounded? Have you built positive relationships around you? Are there people you can rely on? Do you have a network that you can fall back on if you need help? Mentors, coaches, whatever it is, or just friends, right? Good friends that you can kind of reach out to. And last but not least, what's your purpose? Have you built a purpose for yourself? These are like 4, 5 things, but I think, if you practice these things, if we are deliberate about it, I think it starts to help build some of that anti-fragility that I was talking about in doing, getting.
Thank you so much. I think that was really, great advice, because a lot of the students, when we go through this program, they actually start off with purpose, then they end up, they have to build a self-care routine, and they practice a lot of mindfulness along. So I'm sure, it's great gratification for all the people in the CXO 90-day challenge that this is what, live CEOs tell you. So please practice that and keep up the good work. Which just comes back to, we've been asking you about, how do people go up? And I just want to take a question of a top-down look, right? So when you as a CEO hire direct reports for yourself, so you're hiring a CTO, a CIO, all the positions that report directly to you, right? What is it that you look for?
Yeah. So I think it starts with yourself, right? What are your gaps? Not everybody is going to be good at everything. So one thing you have to be very clear with yourself is, where do you bring strengths and where do you need to fill the gaps around you? Okay. Yes, there's functional roles, but even within those functional roles that may potentially be part of your leadership, whether they report to you or they're part, most of us, at least in India, we manage these large, what we call GCCs, right? Where not everybody reports to you, but they're all part of your leadership team, and they have to have those complementary skills. So the way I look at it is, I have a certain set of strength that I bring to the table, and then I know I have my blind spots. So can you fill those gaps with people? So a few things I look for. One is, people with diverse experiences, right? And I'm deliberately using the word diverse, not in a gender sense, but I mean, it could land up being that, because you could get people from, gender diversity that actually brings different experiences or other points of view to the table. But what are those gaps, right? That we need to fill, and we need to fill those with people who can bring those experiences. So I'll give you an example. One thing, I can do it, but I don't enjoy doing it, is, program management, for example. I prefer working, I love strategy. I love taking, nebulous problems, converting that into something more tangible, getting execution done, right? But what I'm not good at is, or I don't enjoy doing is the nuts and bolts of program management. So if I were going to hire somebody who's going to report to me to help me on that front, I would make sure that I'm getting somebody who's very good at doing that. That they bring that demonstrated strength to the table. Or you may want to bring in somebody who doesn't have the experience that you may have, like a finance role, right? You may not be a numbers person, right? I'm a technologist by background. Numbers, while I have done my MBA and everything else, and I know how to read a spreadsheet or a balance sheet, that's not my strength, right? Can you bring in a person who can actually add that, to a larger out? But as a leader, you need to have a very clear framework that you want to operate the organization under. Because that's where you start to recognize what those experiences that you want to bring and stitch together, right? So to me, the strength of a good leadership team or good leadership team -1 or whatever, as you come top down, is a set of, I think about this as a tapestry. It's got different threads, but each of those threads, when woven together, brings a picture that you want to achieve. That picture is what you hold in your mind, right? You have a point of view in terms of how that picture should look. What those threads are and who brings those threads is really the important. So you don't hire people who all look like you, right? I mean, then you're not going to have you'll have a very boring looking tapestry on up there, right? So you hire people with diverse experiences. You bring people in who will challenge you on your thinking, right? So, no yes people, in terms of, that's why I said you need to have people who have strong points of view, but who are willing to hold them lightly, who are willing to discuss, agree, and move forward. Okay. Who've shown experiences of doing. So I think when you're building a leadership cohort, it needs to be very thoughtfully done, right? And one thing I don't do typically is carry people along from job to job. I've seen people do that. They just bring the entire whole leadership team to a new company. It doesn't always work because every situation is different. And the people who are here solving these problems very well may not be the right people for a different scenario or a different use case. So that's also needs to be thought through when you do that.
Yes, I think that's you brought in some very relevant points, which a lot of people here will sort of try and understand how the mind of the CEO works, right? In terms of building a team. So as we're going to getting close to the hour, I'm going to request if there are any questions to please put them in the chat box. So I see Mayank who's put his hand up. Mayank, why don't you unmute yourself and just ask your question?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Mudit, and thank you, Ram, for sharing such valuable insights. It was really encouraging. I'm Mayank Laklani. At ConnectWise, I manage the 120 plus million business for cybersecurity, and I drive primarily the India engineering team and also actively care about the business to billing aspects of the product. So my questions are in line to this introduction. One, how does a CXO role in a data security look like from your experiences and the knowledge that you have? And second is, what percentage do we expect the CXOs to focus on in terms of business and domain? Because in India, majorly the roles are focused around the delivery and people leadership. So, two questions.
Yeah. So I'm not. I mean, I have a point of. Not a very strong point of view in terms of data security and all that. So I very specific to that domain. I probably will not be able to answer that as much as what we're looking for. But I think there are some common traits. But I will probably blend the two questions together into a response. So let me take the second question first. How important is business? From a larger company perspective, etc., where the expectation of the company for the person here is, hey, you manage delivery and you manage your people and make sure that you're running a healthy center for the company and don't get involved in anything. I don't think that will fly. To be honest, I think that those days are over. I run a large GCC. We are about almost 10,000 people in India, and a lot of that growth happened under my watch over the last 5 years. So I have a point of view on, and this is my fourth GCC. So I have seen 4 different companies, but the traits are probably very similar in the sense that I think the old model of use India purely as a cost center is gone. Okay. So I think pure delivery is if your organization is thinking about that way, it's time to reframe it for them. There's a lot of market data available that talks about where GCCs are going, where the startup ecosystem is going, and more importantly, where India is going, right? the digital public goods platform, et cetera, et cetera. I think there is a large movement in very different directions at this point. Second, in terms of, the way I think about this is the India Center is part of the larger fabric of the country. If you don't have an informed point of view about the market, the larger customer base, where the market trends are going and where the company should fit in over the future, I think you're missing a beat, right? I mean, when I talked about a lot of the pieces earlier about putting your hand up, getting involved in projects, thinking of yourself as a global leader just based in India, I think that's very important for a leader of a GCC in India to start thinking that way. Okay? And if your organization is, find the right people in your company who will value that type of a mindset. But you have to also put your foot forward, right? You whether they're asking you or not, you have a point of view. You publish papers internally, get involved in that discussion. Pure delivery has no future. I mean, I am being very blunt here. Okay. I think gone are the days where everybody is now talking, and I also chair the National Product Council. So, I didn't talk about some of the things I do in the larger ecosystem, but this is something that I see on a daily basis. The most successful people in the ecosystem are those who are now seen as global leaders, are not just running a delivery center in India. So that's, I hope I answered your question a little more directly in terms of where my point of view is. Second, in terms of data and security, I think it's a very important area, of course. Data makes everything else go around now. And cybersecurity is what will stop everything in the future, right? So it's like you're sitting with one foot on the brake and one foot on the accelerator. Now the question is, which one do you want to press first? So I think you're in an intersection of a very interesting area. What I would love to see more of is, Mayank, how are you bringing your knowledge forward and publishing more about it and building a larger consensus on what the future is for cybersecurity and data in the as we look ahead. Whether it is sovereignty driven, whether it is AI driven, if everybody has a level playing field now on the whole generative AI debate. Nobody is an expert. Everybody thinks they're an expert, but nobody knows what's going on. And so, great opportunity for you to kind of build a future point.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ram.
Okay, Manish, would you like to just unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Ram. How are you?
Good, Manish.
Okay. Yeah. Ram, just a question. This whole thing about role of a mentor. I'm not talking about an idol. I'm talking about a mentor. For example, like how you did the stint for 3 years when you came back to India in Microsoft. How did it change your way of, reading people or understanding what the overall bigger picture is, and trying to move into that? So how important is the role of a mentor, the right mentor, who could actually take you to places? And when you said, I don't mean carrying along, but I mean actually moving in the right direction.
No, I think it's important. And I don't think it's one mentor, right? I think there are different mentors who are required for different scenarios and different situations. So the way I advise people is build those networks before you need them. Because once you need them, it's too late, right? You can't go around trying to build a network once you need it, right? So I think you have to be thoughtful about opening up new relationships, getting to meet people of diverse types, and et cetera, et cetera. So that who you can draw upon for what when the situation arises. So I think building that pool of people is very important. And sometimes, you need them more often. Sometimes, you need them less often. But at least you know who to go to have a conversation if you're struggling with a piece of, you need a piece of it. So that's one part. I think there is a difference between how you think about a mentor, a coach, and a manager, right? I mean, a person that you work for, etc. I think the 3 years that you described is really a manager, employee relationship. I worked for Ravi for 3 years, so he was my manager, right? But there was a lot of learnings that happened just watching him operate, But I think what has happened post that is really more important, because this happened a long time ago. Is really he became another node in my mentor network, right? And I can reach out to him. He pushes me, right? A good mentor can ask uncomfortable questions, and you have to be open to that. Because it's not about telling you what to do, right? It's asking you, I'll give you one example. About 10 years ago, I think he was the first one who asked me, he said, hey, what do you do outside work? And because I was struggling, I was in a job which required me to be, I was running a global role. I was literally on a plane every 2 to 3 weeks. going somewhere in the world, not even domestically. And my day started at 7:30, 8 in the morning, ended at 1 in the morning, right? So literally, I was in fact, I remember a tweet when I had first joined Twitter, must have been about 10, 11 years ago, sitting in Dubai airport, and I didn't know whether I was coming back to India or was going somewhere. You're that zoned out, right? Because you're burnt out. In fact, the tweet, if I remember it right, said burning a candle on both ends with a blowtorch. And it was a tough time, right? And that's when sometimes you say, okay, what do I do to step back? Who do I talk to? And he just happened to be one of the people I talked to. And he said, what do you do outside work? How do you define your purpose? It's very easy to get on a treadmill and not know how to get off. And so I think you need people like that to ask you some of those questions periodically to say, hey, what are you doing? And subsequently, Ravi, if you have not read his book, he wrote a book recently on what the heck do I do with my life? And it's a very poignant book. And, for me, that reading that book was like a throwback, because a lot of the questions he was bringing up with me was what's captured in that book, right? And it talks about how to build a portfolio life. So I think people like that, he's not the only one. I mean, there are others who over time, who have asked me similar, very uncomfortable questions on various things. And it gets you thinking.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. I think we're at the top of the hour. So thank you so much, Ram. I think it's been a pleasure. A lot of people here have really learned. I can see the messages coming in directly to me. Thank you so much. And I'd just like to thanks everybody for joining in. And thank you very much till we meet again in our next Leader to CXO show. So good night, everybody. And thank you once again.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Mudit.
Mudit. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Bye.